Bloomberg Tech is live from coast to coast with Caroline Hyde in New York and Ed Ludlow in San Francisco.
Welcome to a special edition of Bloomberg Tech. We're live from Washington, D.C. at the intersection of technology and politics, and throughout the hour, we have some top conversations to bring to you.
Yeah, we're right here at the Hill and Valley Forum here in Washington, D.C. We're at the intersection of CEOs, venture capitalists, government officials. They are converging to discuss the U.S.'s lead in AI, but its economic impact and its use in the Iran war.
This is the story. Overnight, Iran continued strikes on U.S. facilities throughout the Gulf, continued strikes on cities throughout Israel, continued activity in the markets. Technology stocks largely are lower. Actually, there's outperformance in semiconductors that are pushing markedly higher on the Philadelphia Semiconductor Index. We start with the conflict in Iran and in the Gulf, and we do that with Anduril Executive Chairman, also a partner at Founders Fund, and that is Trey Stevens. It was a couple of weeks ago, actually, that we spoke to you on the show in San Francisco, and at that point, it was the early days of the war in Iran. We were trying to make sense of the strategy from the US side, the use of drone technology, the use of different ballistic missiles. I think probably the best place to start is an update, I guess, from Anduril's side. There aren't any specific reports of where Anduril's technology has or hasn't been used, but you do have anti-drone technology, for example, in deployment at US facilities in the Gulf. That's part of what we'll be talking about here today at Hill Valley.
Yeah, it is true. I mean, we have a lot of kit deployed in the region. We've been actively engaged in the conflict. Not a whole lot of details I can provide outside of that, of course, but I think there is a big story that has emerged around the asymmetry in drone warfare that's taking place with Iran, where they're lobbying drones that cost tens of thousands of dollars, and we're countering them with capabilities that are upwards of several millions of dollars per shot. So one of the goals that Anduril has had since the very beginning when we started the company in 2017 is to significantly lower the cost of engagement.
Right.
And that's using low-cost munitions, using low-cost interceptors, and that is much of what we have deployed in the region today.
I find this point fascinating. We were talking about JDAMs and the Lucas system, the kind of equivalent of what Iran was using. But with time, having some distance from Iran, literally distance, longer range ballistic missiles will be a part of the story. What have you learned about the battlefield, present day, and where is software coming into it? Because actually that's a big part of what Anduril is working on too.
Yeah, I mean, you think about the software layer as the command and control for, doing air combat, essentially. And the historic way of doing this in a Cold War era conflict is you have dozens of assets in an airspace. You might have fighter planes, you might have bombers. These are very expensive assets. And so shooting a $2.25 million Patriot missile at a MiG-29, that's a pretty good trade. But in modern combat, we're seeing hundreds of assets in an airspace. Low-cost drones, low-cost cruise missiles, rockets, with a more ballistic trajectory, which is a lot of what Hezbollah has been launching into Iran for decades at this point. And you have to figure out a way to counter all those systems in a cost-effective way by threat. So you have to be able to do that analysis to say, is this a thing that we can take out with a ballistic trajectory rocket? Is this something that we have to take out with a Patriot? Is this something we can take out with electronic warfare? And sorting all of that is, at the end of the day, it's an AI problem. And so Anduril has this AI operating system backend that we call Lattice that's used in all of these environments to not only detect and identify and track those assets, but also go through the kill chain analysis and figure out how we can combat these threats in the most cost-effective way possible.
AI in warfare is something that's being stress-tested right now in deployment, but also from an ethical perspective. You just made a speech here at the Hill and Valley Forum, and you talked about philosopher kings, the worry that founders such as yourself start getting involved in the ethical decision-making of the Pentagon. We, of course, are today expecting a courtroom and administrative perspective of what's happening between Anthropic and the Pentagon. So it feels as though you think Anthropic's gone too far.
Well, I think that I believe in democracy. And, I don't want me or Palmer or Brian or Matt, any of my co-founders, making decisions about U.S. policy as it pertains to the use of our capabilities. At the end of the day, we are selling to the United States people, not just the Department of War. And those people have elected representatives that are making decisions about how these things are used. Now, the DOW is way far ahead, actually, of really even our adversaries in determining how AI is going to impact, or autonomy is going to impact the future of warfare. DoD 3000.09 is like one of the policy directives that governs things like CWIS, the Close-In Weapons Support System, which is already deployed. It's a fully autonomous counter-air system that's deployed on naval vessels. So we've been thinking about this for a long time. Obviously, what I was kind of calling out this morning at the Hill and Valley Forum is that I think that the government, Congress, the executive branch, really needs to create clearer guidelines that they can communicate to the commercial industry.
Right, your point was this is an issue of a lack of clarity in policy.
Absolutely, yeah. There's almost like a reticence to engage at the policy level on these really important questions because it's like an abdication of duty. It's like, well, we haven't really been super clear. It's very easy for us to blame the technology industry when they show up with different ideas, but I actually think it's incumbent upon our government to clearly define and think about how technology is going to change the way that we engage in warfare. We engage in taxing our population, the way that we engage in rooting out fraud, waste. All of these are technology questions, but they're policy problems. And that means that we need to have policy guidance that informs it.
Is it incumbent on the government or on founders such as yourselves? You have to say you sounded pretty statesman-like out there, Trey. Is it up to you or the government to start winning the battle for the hearts and minds of people right now when it comes to AI? At the moment, it is doomer after doomer, negativity after negativity, because we've lost the ability to storytell on what's positive about AI.
Well, I would give a lot of credit actually to the director of OSTP, Michael Kratsios. I think he's done an incredible job actually laying out what he thinks the strategy should look like. But he has to put that in the hands of Congress, right? And so he's given his guidelines. Congress is in a position now where they need to respond to those and see if they can come up with policies that are good for the American people. But I don't think that the administration is sitting idly by, not taking action on this. I think Michael and his team have done a great job.
Because if it was codified, I think the point you were making on stage is that if it was more codified, then people's red lines would be benchmarked against the rules.
Yeah, there's this false narrative that exists that tech companies don't want regulation. I think we don't want excessive regulation, but some regulation is good because it provides us with the guardrails that we know if we build within these constraints, there's an incentive structure that we can be rewarded for.
Let me ask you this. Founders Fund separate from your role at Anduril, Founders Fund is an investor in Anthropic. Did the firm make any intervention or support of Dario Amodei in that decision-making of the last 2 weeks?
Well, the actual history behind why we're called Founders Fund is that we believe in being founder-friendly. And we've never fired a founder. We've never voted against a founder in a board governance position either. And it was very unique when we started this 20 years ago. It's becoming more popularized today. But what that means in practice is that we're not trying to run these people's companies. Dario runs his own company. He's the founder CEO of Anthropic. I have engaged in conversations with both him and the department, of course, but I don't see it as the role of the financial investor in a company to try to impact the way that the company is approaching things, or even try to convince their would-be customers to approach them in any particular way either.
Ohio. In January of 2025, you invited me to Ohio, and I went, and Palmer promised that by the end of 2026, that place would be up and running and producing.
Yeah.
And it is.
As of yesterday, we are fully up and operational now in Arsenal 1, the first 800,000 square feet of manufacturing in our Columbus facility. We'll be producing a run rate of around 120 to 150 aircraft, Fury collaborative combat aircraft.
Contextualize that a bit.
Yeah, so basically building fighter planes is really hard. We build an autonomous fighter plane called Fury. And so we have 800,000 square feet that is being spun up right now to start manufacturing these fighter planes. And we'll be at a rate of over 100 aircraft moving forward.
That ain't cheap, Trey.
It's
you're
not cheap.
quite good at raising funds. And what we understand is that with Anduril, we're raising about $4 billion and a $61 billion valuation. Is that where we are, and how close are we to the finish line?
Well, we're in a really lucky position in that it's not a fundraise necessarily, it's more of like figuring out allocations. And I'm in the middle of that right now, and so I would hate to, on live television, make any commitments around a timeline knowing that I'm going to get about 100 emails as I walk out of this. Sure. So I'll leave it at that.
You've got the problem of inbound and demand, therefore, shall we say, trade, but there's a lot of people, dare I take it back to the Middle East, and this is a human issue. But it's also a money issue, and people are looking at the Middle East and wondering, are we still going to get the support for our startups? Are we going to still get that funding that we become used to, the deep pools of capital? Or are they going to have to be siphoning off money to the very much here and now of rebuilding their countries? How do you think about that as you look at that dynamic?
Well, I think the Middle Eastern sovereign funds have done an incredible job of being committed to the future of their countries outside of the confines of energy, which has been obviously the primary driver for growth for them for a long time. So do I think that KSA or the UAE or Qatar are going to walk away from being financial investors in that future? No, I don't think that's probable at all. They have very deep pockets. They have teams that are incredibly engaged. Now, what that does mean, I think, is that those financial investors will become much more interested in being financially involved in things like rebuilding, which will many times involve U.S. companies, whether that's AI companies, defense companies, infrastructure. There's a lot of layers there that they'll be playing into.
The reporting overnight was some of the Gulf nations either becoming more deeply involved in the war in Iran or having a viewpoint that it continues. The Hill and Valley Forum is about, in simple terms, the relationship between the technology sector, Silicon Valley, and the different arms of government. And Anduril is a great case study for how that's going. How's that going?
Well, I always tell people when they come and pitch defense tech companies that your product is important, but it's not sufficient. Necessary, but not sufficient. You really have to know how to work the government side of the equation. Procurement has been broken for a really, really long time. You could build a perpetual motion machine and pitch it to the Department of Defense historically, and they would say, wow, that's cool that you built a perpetual motion machine. We're going to give $1 trillion to Lockheed Martin to try to build the perpetual motion machine that you already built. Luckily, I think we're moving away from that. This administration is not the first. Going back to even Ash Carter's days during the Obama administration, there was a renewed focus on innovation with the Third Offset Initiative, the Defense Innovation Board, the Defense Digital Service. So the cultural shift has been happening for over a decade now. And this administration has really doubled down on the idea that we need new entrants. We need a new arsenal of democracy, a new arsenal of freedom. And they're streamlining a lot of the processes that have gummed things up in the past. I think Secretary Hegseth is very committed to this. Undersecretary Mike Duffy, who runs acquisitions and sustainment, and Undersecretary Emil Michael, who, before being, working in research and engineering in the Department of War, was famously the COO of Uber. Right. So if we don't talk about Hill and Valley intersections, maybe no better example than Undersecretary Michael.
And there is just a wall of opportunity in terms of the amount of founders that are coming. We just had a story out today, Kleiner Perkins raising money, $3.5 billion, and they're saying they've never seen this quality and quantity of founders. A lot of them are ex-Palantir, as you were, and you've borne out Anduril. What isn't being fixed yet by the founder community? What do you want to see, say, with your Founders Fund hat on?
One of the things Peter Thiel once told me is that whenever someone asks you what you're excited about, it's them saying, I'm really confused. I'm not excited about anything. So I hope that's not what you're saying, Caroline.
I'm excited about it all.
I'm excited about a lot of things. I think that a lot of the themes that we're seeing that have emerged in the Hill and Valley Forum are about reindustrialization. Yeah. And so while AI is really exciting, I don't disagree with that. I think that it will change things about our labor force. It will change things about the way that we do, solve a lot of critical problems as a nation. We also, sent away a lot of the industrial capacity that we have built over many, many decades in the last 30 years. And there needs to be a rebuilding that happens there. And there are some categories that I would say are maybe more critical than others. When you think about critical supply chain as a big one, semiconductors is a big one. These are industries that the startup community can't do alone. The capital investment that would be required is truly enormous.
Well, like the $5 trillion that Elon Musk might need for his Terafab.
Yes, exactly. As one example. Yes. But I think that this is like an area where the government can work more closely with Silicon Valley to say, hey, we need to take some bets. And if you go back to that Obama era, there was the investment in Cylindra that was this kind of famous explosion that led to the government taking a step away from being more involved in those sort of infrastructure bets. I think we need to get back to being willing to take bets as a nation in order to rebuild our industrial capacity. And if we don't do that, I think we're in a really, really bad spot. So, that'll be a big focus of not only Founders Fund, but I'm also hoping the American government, given that I think it's super important.
Trey, it's always great to catch up with you. Thank you for being so generous with your time. Trey Stevens is Executive Chairman of Anduril, and also Founders Fund partner. Now coming up, plenty more from Hidden Valley Forum right here in Washington. We speak with, well, the co-founders of the event, Daniel Asparov. This is Bloomberg Tech. Silicon Valley's alignment with the current administration is on full display here at the Hidden Valley Forum. Business leaders are pushing to keep the US ahead in AI. But of course, that push is being tested by growing concerns over the economic impact and its use in the Iran war. Joining us now are the co-founders of Hidden Valley, Daniel Asparov of Founders Fund, Christian Garrett of 137 Ventures. Gentlemen, I know that both of you are going to say this is very much bipartisan approach and all voices are in the room. Daniel, I go to you first. What are we learning at this particular Hidden Valley about how well currently Silicon Valley and the administration are working? I mean, we have a conflict upon us at this time, which is very much a tech conflict in many ways.
Yeah, I mean, I talked about this a little bit yesterday at a press briefing that we sort of did, where you obviously have this sort of conflict between Anthropic and DOW right now. That in some ways you could argue is a parallel to the Maven project back in 2016, and I think that's actually a false analogy. Fundamentally, in this day and age, you're having a technology leader on both sides having this argument, which they may disagree from first principles, but Emil Michael is not some bureaucrat that does not understand technology at a fundamental level, and he's obviously up against Dario Amati. I think that looks very different than in the Maven era, where there was like a true schism. Now, you touch on whether or not we're sort of bipartisan today. I do think my sort of last panel that I just got off of, Senator Maria Cantwell, very senior ranking member on the Democratic side, Vinod Khosla, one of the largest Democratic donors. There was a lot of interesting issues that were discussed around how should AI regulation work, how should the red lines sort of work between DOW, autonomous weapons, and Pentagon. And so I do think this is a perfect forum where you're having discussions about some of the core topics with even the sort of members of the Senate that are not necessarily in the majority sort of right now, but they very may well soon be. And we want to make sure that this forum, irrespective of who is in office, after this midterm cycle, after the 2028 election, still becomes a place where you can convene the leaders of both policy and government. And I think the way that we know that we'll have succeeded is that in 2028, when we run this forum, whether it's President Ocasio-Cortez or President Rubio or President Vance, we still have a phenomenal gathering of both elected officials and technology leaders.
And exciting traffic throughout.
And exciting traffic.
Christian, I go to you because what's so interesting in this moment is there's a very healthy debate on either side of the aisle about China's role at this moment and the relationship with which we should be exporting AI, US technology to China, something Vinod Khosla has spoken about year after year here with the Hidden Valley and the intersection of Silicon Valley and the administration. How is that being navigated at this moment?
I think you've seen a lot of discussions across different parts of the supply chain that in particular have sort of highlighted the views here. And the reality is from a national security perspective, for years now, Americans have all seen the importance of having resiliency within our supply chains. And every single year, it seems like something highlights a new bottleneck within that. It's critical minerals and rare earth elements. Just earlier in the year, last year, so far this year, it's been memory. I think you're seeing on energy costs and the problems with the grid.
I think Brad Lightcap, who's OpenAI's COO, he brought up the memory bottleneck as being a restraint on them at least.
Exactly. And the energy one.
And the energy as well. And then years ago, it was getting everything from masks and PPE all the way down to vaccines and pharmaceutical ingredients. And so I think it's been a long cycle across both administrations more recently in realizing these problems. And I think people are seeing the importance of sort of bringing home domestic supply chains. Now, however, you're still going to have a deep relationship, and this is what's unique about this Cold War in particular. It's much more of an economic focus And there's a lot more ties between global economies than there was in the previous Cold War, and so that creates some nuances and differences. And I think whether it's with adversaries and competitors, which these are our adversaries, I think the forum at least is very, very open about all kinds of different views and discussions and having debates, but we're very obvious about who our adversaries are and who the good guys are in our view, to use a better, lack of a better term. And with Russia, China, and Iran, although there are ties, there are going to be areas where it just makes no sense to have reliance on these countries.
A lot of this is framed through the lens of defense technology, but Trey Stevens was just telling us actually it's more about reindustrialization generally. I want to talk to you guys about space, really. We're going to be fortunate to speak to NASA Administrator Isaacman pretty shortly. I think you're going to speak to him as well. At 137, SpaceX is a critically important investment for you guys. The big news of the day is basically NASA trying to accelerate the Moon program and also the Mars program away from Hill Valley, and also as a venture capitalist. Varda is your other job.
One of many.
Let's just ask a simple question. How is space going for America right now? And see if you can fit it into 30 seconds.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's becoming an exciting, sort of moment. When Morgan spoke with the administrator just a couple weeks ago, he was announcing NASA Force, which was trying to combine some of the, sort of private-public, sort of talents, so that you start to have people rotate in. As an example of the Hill and Valley Forum being a venue for that type of policy, we're actually doing a sit-down with the administrator as well as a bunch of the private commercial space companies that are here to talk about NASA Force and how to participate in that. Today was obviously the launch of Ignition and their broad policy change, which I would argue is probably the largest space policy change that the United States has had in the last 20 years.
What's specifically different about it, Dell?
It's a large focus on increased, sort of cadence, and in particular, an increased reliance on autonomy across all of the areas, Mars, Moon, as well as low Earth orbit. And so the discussion today was around, rather than right now, only relying on human-based basically transport to the Moon to establish the infrastructure, starting to do monthly robotic launches basically down to the Moon and using the robots ahead of time to start to establish infrastructure before humans come. Same thing in low Earth orbit. Jared has talked a lot about igniting the low Earth orbit economy, and a part of that is doing both things on human-rated stations like the ISS and the future Axioms, VAST, et cetera, of the world.
Commercial
but then
space
also relying on these, autonomous, sort of platforms like what we build on Varda that allows you to accelerate with high cadence and high production, similar to what we're doing on the Moon with the robotic missions like Firefly, like Intuitive Machines, like Blue Ghost.
It's an exciting time where maybe we see the capital needs of a SpaceX become a windfall for venture capitalists at some point. But Christian, your perspective on just how much money is necessary from private hands at this moment to keep on building in space?
It's a great question. I think the growth of the private sector has been very conducive to give founders more opportunities and more options in order how to build their companies. The space sector, alongside many others within broader hard tech or industrials, aerospace and defense broadly, is much more capital intensive.
Sure.
But what's changed is the access to capital is very different than what it was 5-10 years ago. It's much easier to build a company like Varda, not just because SpaceX exists and paved the way for how to build a business selling to the government here in the United States, but also driving costs down to make this business model even work. But the last piece as well is it's made venture capitalists much more, and risk capital, much more interested in these harder problems because they see the opportunity sets. And government plays a huge role in this. Government very much on the other side. They create the demand signal. And when they make big bets and take risks on companies in the private sector, it allows new businesses and new founders and new individuals to try to go build things. And that creates a really, really powerful recursive loop that leads to innovation and also leads to economic opportunity. There are people that are able to build wealth now and able to create businesses that would not have existed before if government didn't do its part and if companies like SpaceX and others didn't pave the way.
Del, real quick, Terrafab, it was so SpaceX heavy, it was much more about orbital data center than anything else. What did you make of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think in order to tackle some of the economic challenges against competing against terrestrial data centers, you do need to figure out how to both make new chips that operate at much higher temperatures.
By the way, I loved watching you over a course of a year on X just go up and down with orbital data center. So just, have at it.
Yeah, it's definitely been fun. One of the, I think, preliminary or, prominent, sort of websites that discusses the economics of it was done by our chief engineer at Varda, Andrew McCaleb. He actually was cited in The Economist showing the, McCaleb cost of data centers and then, what SpaceX was projecting. I think the only way that they are able to figure it out is if they do it at the scale at which they're sort of talking about. It's going to require new materials. It's going to require much larger satellites than they've ever produced it before. And you're going to be talking about Starship launching thousands of times. I think the best thing, though, is that on the journey between now and the orbital data centers being there's going to be a ton of economic value that is created along the way, because these satellites are going to just become more and more powerful Starlink internet satellites. And so I don't think we're that far away from an iPhone having a phased array antenna inside of it and you having 24/7 coverage across the globe, because it turns out that's more than enough from Starlink.
Delian Asparov, Founders Fund, VADA, Christian Garrett, 137 Ventures, the hosts and co-founders of the Hill and Valley Forum here in Washington, D.C. Coming up, builder of automated factories Hadrian gets big backing from the US Navy, $900 million. We'll speak to the CEO next. This is Bloomberg Tech.
Welcome back to a very special edition of Bloomberg Tech. We are live from the Hill and Valley Forum right here in Washington, D.C. And Ed, look, advanced manufacturing firm Hadrian has just announced a partnership with the U.S. Navy, building out a 2.2 million square foot automated facility in Alabama that is set to mass produce components for Virginia-class attack submarines and Columbia-class ballistic missile submarines. Look, the project includes $900 million from the Navy, $1.5 billion in private capital, totaling $2.4 billion. Who better to speak about it? Chris Power, Hadrian CEO. You made the announcement March 20th. You're here now talking about, well, is this the first of many? Are we thinking about big contracts with the rest of the Pentagon?
It is. I mean, the reindustrialization of America is a multi-$100 billion issue. And a lot of our key production programs like Virginia and Columbia class are hundreds of millions of man or women hours behind schedule. So we're very excited to partner with the Navy on the first, what I would call reindustrialize America deal, with the support of the President's doctrine on restoring maritime dominance, as well as the Secretary of the Navy. But for Hadrian, this is how we launch our production as a service advanced factories model in these massive efforts. And this will be the first of many that we announce this year.
It is interesting because when you first started coming on Bloomberg Tech, the idea was there, and this is it coming to fruition, and you're laughing, but it is of quite large scale. I want to ask you the question that you've been over with us before, but I think it will help the audience understand Hadrian. What is Hadrian's core competence?
Our core competency is taking legacy designs from other manufacturers, like the primes or startups, and building highly automated factories to just mass produce whatever they need.
Faster?
Faster, more efficient, or frankly at all. I think what we really got to focus on here is anyone can build or capitalize a factory with dollars. But the American workforce has been on life support for 4 decades. So there just aren't that many skilled tradespeople left. So we have to get this productivity uplift for welding, machining, advanced automation methods with software and AI to give the American worker a productivity uplift, and that's the main story here.
Well, there's a breath of fresh air. Are you saying that in this current state of technology and AI, we need more people, more humans working in lockstep?
Yes, and in advanced manufacturing in the US, the average age of a skilled worker is 65. And the biggest shortage the Navy and other people have got is they could spend $1 billion and try to hire 1 million welders, and they just don't exist in the country. So we need to up-level every possible manufacturing worker we've got with advanced technology to make them more productive, because we just don't have them on shore anymore.
What about supply chain? We don't have that on shore, and at the moment we're even more worried about it because of the Strait of Hormuz. It's
a terrible issue, and I think the Strait of Hormuz issue is in things like critical munitions also. We're working out that this is a production fight. We have the most advanced defense systems in the world, but we just need a lot more of them. But we haven't really redone manufacturing since the end of the Cold War, and that's left us with a aging workforce that needs to be upgraded with technology in partnership with the workforce to make them more productive. Because we just don't have enough Americans to get the job done. So we need the fusion of software and people to get it working.
I think we should talk a little bit about Alabama. It's a very conscious, deliberate decision to locate there. It relates to the supply chain question, but how is that played out in reality? So if there is a deficit of skilled workers and supply chains are under pressure, did Alabama help to mitigate that, or it was equally as complex irrespective of where you locate it?
It's equally as complicated, but Hadrian's model is that through our software platform Opus, we can train people in 30 to 40 days instead of a decade for this highly skilled version. We partnered with Alabama for a couple of reasons. There's so much history in that state. In World War II, there were 60,000 Alabamians building ships. And it was a huge manufacturing hub that, through Chinese offshoring and the degradation of our industrial base, lost all those jobs. So one of the reasons we partnered with the state, apart from they're amazing people to deal with, is just like, for us, it's a real spiritual return to Alabama's history of kicking absolute ass in World War II.
Right.
We need them to, get back in the fight again, and Factory 4 is the first, opening stanza of that.
I appreciate that being here in Washington, D.C., there is a focus on procurement, selling this stuff to the different arms of our military and government. But actually, would you take us through the production process start to finish? Just the simple terms of what it is that happens at the Alabama facility.
Yeah, so we'll be making tons and tons of high-precision components with a variety of manufacturing methods, with an innovative manufacturing as a service model where you're buying it as factory output instead of component by component, as well as what we call sequence-critical materials, which is like, hey, you're trying to build a bunch of cars, but no one can get the wheels in on time, so you make zero cars, of like highly complex integrated products. I mean, a nuclear submarine is more complicated than Starship to build. It's the highest precision product we've got. And from start to finish, raw material comes in, advanced AI powered with the new workforce of the future, end product comes out for submarine construction. And later, importantly, we're upsizing this facility pre-planned to be able to support repair and sustainment, as well as the President's Golden Fleet initiative. Because all that shipbuilding's going to tap the same supply base and the same workforce that is just, we don't have enough capacity. So we need to rapidly build capacity to enable the delivery of these programs.
Chris, the elephant in the room is we sit here talking about the need for labour in the US, and you're an Australian by birth, I believe it is. We're British people. I mean, how much do you need immigration to be fixed? How much do you think about exporting what Hadrian does to other allies?
Yeah.
I think the big issue the US faces is we have a very highly paid middle class, which makes the manufacturing hub. So you need automation to create more and better jobs. But all of our allies like Australia, Japan, and NATO are in the same position where they offshored everything to China. They need their own sovereign manufacturing. So we're working on this later this year with allied partners, especially on the AUKUS program, where it's so tied into nuclear submarines. And without that technology and workforce link, Australia, my home country, offshored the 2 car manufacturers in the mid-90s. So Australia doesn't have a skilled workforce either, because we offshored everything. So everyone's in the same position of the allied countries, where everyone's going to need advanced production technology to have their own sovereign capability, or simply deliver the weapons systems that people are buying. Just because we're giving out, hundreds of billions of dollars for new weapon systems, it doesn't mean their factories are actually going to be able to produce them on time. And that's why we're looking at the fundamental underpinnings of this factories as a service model.
Chris Powell of Hadrian, it's great to have you back on Bloomberg Tech. Thank you very much. So coming up, Overmatch Ventures raises $250 million in its second fund. We're going to speak with Overmatch general partner Morgan Hitzig. That's next. This is Bloomberg Tech.
Overmatch Ventures. Well, it's just raised $250 million in an oversubscribed second fund. Now, the early-stage VC firm focuses on investments within deep tech, defense, space. And here with the latest is Morgan Hitzig, Overmatch general partner. Last time we spoke, you were at Venrock, and now you've made this big decision. You're coming aboard. There's just 3 of you with an awful lot of capital to deploy. Where do you put it? Where's the real focus for you?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having us. There's no place that we rather announce Overmatch Ventures Second Fund than with the 2 of you here live from Hill and Valley. So $250 million, we're investing across 3 key domains, deep tech, defense, and space. We're calling it America's Sovereign Stack. So super excited to be able to focus principally on the technologies that are creating our competitive edge.
I think what's really interesting is, and I mean this with respect, what is it that you're going to be able to do at Overmatch that you couldn't do anywhere else, or as a solo GP, which has been an interesting theme that I've been writing about a little bit over the last 2 years?
I think there are a variety of things. I had an absolutely wonderful experience at Venrock. I think one of the things that's really unique about the 3 of us coming together, so my 2 other co-founders and co-general partners are Evan Loomis, who is a longtime founder, founded a company called Icon, and Jordan Blaszek, who's also a Marine combat veteran and multi-time founder. I think the 3 of us coming together, we see this as America's decisive decade. I think there's true value alignment, not just in the general partnership, but also in the LP base. So we have raised that $250 million all from American investors, and it's not just the fund itself. Our LPs are actually following alongside us in a lot of these direct investments. So last week alone, in 72 hours, we raised a little over $100 million for 2 of our Fund 1 companies to be able to help kind of follow along the kind of critical trends. So it's both the GP alignment, but also the LP alignment.
And being able to be the bigger than the sum of your parts. What you bring that's so distinct is not only your expertise when it comes to deploying money, but also you're a combat veteran. How do you feel this current moment, the conflicts, and there are conflicts that we've seen over the course of this year alone, what is it telling you that needs to be improved or needs to be invested in when it comes to the intertwining of Silicon Valley or VC and tech and the Pentagon?
So one of the things that's really unique, and if we had had this conversation a month ago, we may have had a very different dialogue, and I think we might have talked about this a little bit in October. It's just where valuations were. I probably would have said we're in the 7th inning. But when we look at capability and capability deployment in this particular conflict, we're probably in the 2nd inning. I mean, you're seeing some early signals of what it means to put attritable mass in the hands of warfighters. We saw the deal last week announced from Skydio, which was, the Army doing a $52 million deal in 72 hours, which is sort of unprecedented for them. Yeah. But we need to see a lot more of it. And so because we're in that really early stage from a capability standpoint, I think there's just so much room to run for this domain.
Morgan Hitzig, now of Overmatch Ventures, great to have you on the show. Breaking news of a new fund and a new firm for you as well. Now, coming up on the program, NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman with us next to talk about efforts to return the US to the moon and beyond, new efforts, a new plan. That conversation coming up. This is Bloomberg Tech. America will never again give up on the moon. Those are the words of NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman in a press conference this morning discussing new plans for the space agency. The core of it is $20 billion of investment over 7 years, the focus to build a moon base, but there is so much more to it than that. And delighted to say that NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman joins us right now here at the Hill and Valley Forum, but on Bloomberg Tech. You will not be surprised, Administrator, that my first question is about money. $20 billion, where does it come from? And I guess, your plans have evolved pretty rapidly since you took post. What does this figure signify in how you're doing it differently?
Sure. I mean, it's interesting. A lot of people think NASA doesn't have the resources to execute on the mission. I'm like, our appropriations this year is $25 billion. $25 billion is an awful lot of money, not to mention we received a $10 billion plus up in the One Big Beautiful Bill, which is probably one of the most significant investments in human space exploration that we've seen in an extremely long time. Bottom line is, we have the resources. Are we concentrating them in the right direction? Or are we doing a lot of little things and getting nowhere, right? So we talked today, hey, we're going to hit pause on the Gateway, which was a space station designed to orbit above the moon. Right. We don't want to orbit above the moon. We want to be on the moon. We want to build a base. We want to interact with the regolith. We want to do in-situ resource manufacturing. We want to test out mobility on the surface, do power, communications. We want to build President Trump's moon base that he called for in the National Space Policy. We have the resources to do this. We have a lot of resources at NASA. We just need to move them in the needle-moving direction.
It's $20 billion over 7 years, but all told over the decade, $30 billion. Is this something that you've been able to meet with Congress about and appropriate the funds through that mechanism, or it's just in the budget? It's planned based on the annual appropriation that you outlined?
This is within the resource available, and of course we try and subscribe to a no surprise policy, so we never formulate these type of initiatives in a vacuum. We've met with our international partners that are supporting us in our great return to the moon. We've met with leaders from from authorizers in Congress, the appropriators, the White House. Everybody gets fully aligned around how we're going to achieve this. When you talk about these kind of dollars and you look at it across our budget, this is just small percentages of it. We definitely have the means within the resource available to achieve this. You think about it, we have a science technology mission directorate, right? Does lots of experimentation for future applications from the moon to Mars. Great, we're going to the moon. We concentrate STMD in that direction. We have a science mission directorate, right? They have a CLIPS program. We do lots of scientific missions on the moon. Great, we're going to the moon. We concentrate that on building the moon base and attaching scientific payloads. It's really across the board. ESDMD, which is tasked with the return to the moon and thinking through Mars. We've got a lot of resources there from Gateway, especially since that was plussed up in the budget.
Resources.
And we are repurposing that to the surface where we all want to be. So NASA does not have a top-line problem. I can't emphasize that enough.
Thank you.
Administrator, you have gone fast your entire life. You were building businesses in your parents' basement at the age of 16. You've got Shift 4. You move at the speed of founder. Do your partners, the Artemis partners, move at the speed that you need them to?
Well, we've been talking to industry, and we've been emphasizing now is the time to act. We have to execute with urgency. I've said it many times. President Trump and his national space policy says we need to return to the moon, before the end of 2028. Our great rival has said they will return before 2030. That means success and failure is measured in months, not years.
Yeah.
We don't have time to do things the way we used to do. We have to get in gear. That's why I said during my keynote this morning, we are not going to sit on our hands at NASA and hope industry delivers. We are going to do what we did in the 1960s. We're deploying our subject matter experts to every vendor, every subcontractor, every component on the critical path, not to be passive but active, to drive outcomes. We're going to do this with our commercial and international partners.
Your great competitor, being China. What do you need from a supply chain perspective that you can't get your hands on in the here and now? What keeps you up at night in terms of meeting your mission?
Well, I think it's there's a lot of components on the supply chain that we care an awful lot about, as you would expect. I mean, going to the moon takes the contributions from many. When we talk about building a moon base, we need hypergol thrusters. We were sending CLPS landers to the moon 2 or 3 times a year. I said this morning we're going to go from bespoke and infrequent to templated and routine, which means we're going to need a lot of hypergol thrusters, right? So this is why we're deploying our subject matter experts into the field with our partners to drive outcomes, because if we wind up in a situation where we're going over budget or behind schedule, we are going to act. We're either going to act with our partners or we're going to apply some of the best and brightest minds from across the nation to build the solution ourselves to get to the outcome.
You said this morning, and you've just reiterated, that you've asked industry to find ways to get back to the moon more rapidly. But I guess to try and make that a little more crystallized, what are the benchmarks that you'll hold them to? What are the milestones that you need industry to hit? And then we can get, I guess, onto the Artemis program from there.
Well, let's break it into 2 categories. So just returning humans to the moon, we said we got to get at a pace of launching a moon rocket with greater frequency than every 3 years. So we need you to pull forward production, pull everything to the left, set up for another mission. So Artemis 2 is going to launch in a week and go around the moon. Artemis 3 is going to be very a la Apollo 9, launch in Earth orbit, rendezvous with 1 or 2 landers, and then we'll set up for Artemis 4 and 5, which will be a landing on the moon in 2028. So we've spoken to industry and told them, you have to start pulling things to the left. We will again deploy resources to help you in that process. We will also rebuild core competencies so we can turn our launch pad to meet launch cadence. But then there's also building the moon base, which is lots of landings in phase 1, which is our test and experimentation phase.
This is where robotics comes in.
Yes. So this is where we've sent a demand signal to industry today. Again, not infrequent bespoke landers and rovers, lots of them, iterative approach. Land lots of landers, lots of rovers, do experimentation, comms, navigation, mobility, power. We'll learn in phase 1, inform semi-habitability in phase 2, ultimately get to phase 3 where we're looking to have that enduring presence on the moon. This is the demand signal we're sending to industry. Industry's responding.
Administrator, Bloomberg reported this month that there are 2 proposals on your desk, so to speak, one from Blue Origin and one from SpaceX, different mechanisms for future missions that relate to the moon. In simple terms, in the proposal that Bloomberg reported, which related to SpaceX, Starship would be involved in some capacity with future missions, going in low Earth orbit, combining with Orion and propelling the combined entity to the moon. What are the status of those proposals, and what can you say about them, and why those 2 proposals came up in the first place?
So my predecessor asked industry, what are your acceleration pathways? Because again, we don't have the time here. Now I will compliment both SpaceX and Blue Origin are not trying to build a lander to put boots on the ground, to plant the flag and pick up rocks. They're building landers that allow us to put lots of mass on the moon so we can build the base, have an enduring presence, to go far beyond where we went with Apollo and be able to undertake frequent and affordable missions to the surface. So in fairness, they are taking on a technically complex approach. We did ask, how can you accelerate? How can you simplify? Both have come back with options that kind of buy down some of the technical risk. And in both cases, it means different orbits. NRHO, which NASA originally designed in part to support the Gateway, nobody likes.
In Administrator, in layman's terms, NHRO is the path around the moon. Could you just explain that?
Right. It is a relatively stable orbit around the moon. If you were going to put a moon space station, that's where you would put it, which was our kind of agenda up until now, where we're concentrating on an actual base on the moon. It had less abort options to come home. It came, as we would say, a DV penalty, or it came with a performance penalty for both SpaceX and Blue Origin to actually get to. So it didn't really help anyone in that. One of our HLS, one of our landing providers, came back and said, I'd rather meet you in a different lunar orbit. And the other one said, I'd rather meet you into a high Earth orbit. In either scenario, it doesn't change the fact that Orion is going to get to those landers via the Space Launch System.
It's just that NHRO is not included in either plan.
Correct.
Could we speak a little bit about Mars before we run out of time?
Sure. We have a really exciting mission to Mars we announced
Explain
today.
it, and there is a date, there is a timeline for it, which I was a little surprised at.
Yeah, so we will never give up an opportunity to go to Mars during the planetary alignment window. The next one comes in 2028. We've got a Mars telecommunication network orbiter that's going to Mars in 28, which will carry a science payload. We have a joint mission with ESA, the Rosalind Franklin rover, which is going to go search search for or potentially organic matter. Like it's a part of our larger quest for looking for life out in the universe. And then the big announcement today is we are launching the first nuclear interplanetary spacecraft, nuclear electric powered spaceship, and it's going to drop the Skyfall payload, which is Ingenuity class helicopters on Mars.
He did it well. Jared Isaacman, NASA Administrator, with a lot of news coming up. So much more from Hill and Valley Forum here in DC. This is Bloomberg.
Welcome back to a special edition of Bloomberg Tech, live from the Hill and Valley Forum in Washington, D.C. We're joined by Palantir CTO Shom Sankar, and there is a lot happening right now. We can go through it. The war in Iran and the role that technology companies have or have not played in it. There's also just a broader discussion about the government's right to do with technology that it procures as it wishes. And if it's okay, I'd like to start there. Palantir has a technology relationship with Anthropic, but it has a technology relationship with many of the frontier model labs.
Yeah.
And actually, Alex Karp, the CEO, has been relatively clear on what the company's position is, but it's our first opportunity to talk to you. And so I just asked if you'd reflect on what happened and how Palantir is approaching its choice of technology partner in light of that.
Well, I think what we want to do, our thesis from the beginning has been that this is a form of commodity cognition, that actually you're going to have multiple LM providers. There's going to be a little bit of a horse race, who's better, when they're better. You're going to need the infrastructure to evaluate which models you should be using and which use cases when, and that's going to be a moving target. You don't make that determination once, it's going to be ongoing. So in our context, even in the work that we do with the government, switching even a very complicated, sophisticated set of workflows, that's order of weeks worth of work. That's part of the value proposition of what we're doing. And the integration of this stuff to derive economic value is where we're very focused. I think in the present moment, we were talking a little bit off camera about the kind of AI doomerism that sees the country. I think a lot of that is a consequence of who we're listening to about AI. These revolutions, technology revolution in general, they're tools-driven revolutions, not concept-driven revolutions. Galileo did not invent the telescope. He used the telescope to discover the planets and planetary motion. The power loom, the personal computer, the microscope, the implications of these inventions on humanity were not determined or even predicted by the inventors. They were determined by those who wielded the technology itself. So the people, the inventors of AI are geniuses. They're national treasures. but it doesn't actually mean they're right about the implications it's going to have. The people who I think have really interesting opinions are the frontline factory workers, the ICU nurses, the people whose jobs are actually being changed by it. And when you ask them how do they feel about their job with AI, they're actually really positive about it. But I think more profoundly, when you ask them, how do you feel about your children's future in an America with AI? That's where they're most excited. And to me, that is the qualitative definition of a thriving middle class, that you believe your children's future will be better than yours.
So what's Palantir doing on that? I think this might be one of your questions as well, Caroline. Like, in the general public in the United States, people do have mixed feelings about AI. Probably they may have no understanding of how AI is impacting the industry they work in. But Palantir works across public and private sectors, lots of different types of companies. Off camera, I gave you the example of General Mills.
Yeah.
It might be a name that the everyday American knows. Do you feel like you have a duty to go out and give some good PR to AI and its benefit to society?
The stories that are true and happening.
I mean, he's got a movie project at the moment.
That's what I'm leading us to,
Yeah, let me tell you about, a narrative violation here is we work with a submarine parts manufacturer in the supply chain, because they were able to use AI to get rid of the 2 weeks of planning time where they were essentially tools down developing the production plan, and now AI lets them do that in 10 minutes, they had more work to do, which meant they had to add a third shift of workers. So the sort of facile view of this, that somehow it's just linearly going to replace jobs, I think it's wrong. Actually, we have a huge amount of human agency in terms of how we apply this technology. And I think the American people are skeptical of it because mostly what they see is AI slop. The impact in the economy right now is nascent. And that's because a lot of the labs are so busy inventing the technology. Let's call that the first 80% of the work. Well, there's a second 80% of the work, which is how do you translate this impact into the actual real economy? That's the work that we're busy doing every day. Like, how does this turn into economic value? And getting those stories out there, I think, is really important. So what you see is that AI is the antidote to the 20th century's managerial revolution.
I'm going to push back on what you said, that if you talk to the ICU nurse or you talk to those who are in the factories, that they're excited for their children. I haven't heard many people say they're excited for their children with AI. Where are you hearing this? What's your data? And how are we going to scale that so that people are excited about it?
Well, there's a question of, are you talking to people who are actually using AI versus people who are afraid of what it's going to do? So if you go to Tampa General, the ICU nurses at Tampa General, they will give you a very optimistic view, having experienced how it enables them to spend more time at the bedside of their patient, less time munging notes and figuring out which patients to spend time with. So that's, I think, the normative value of AI for America is that it should give the American worker superpowers. How do we make the American worker 50 times more productive than any other worker anywhere else? And that's going to solve the math problem of how we reindustrialize the country. We shouldn't be doing that symmetrically with our competitors. It is David's slingshot against Goliath here.
It's also about training, reskilling, ensuring that the workforce of today can use the tools that they're currently being inundated with. And I'm interested, forward deployed engineers is something that we're seeing being used across the board, and it's something you invented, basically.
That's right.
Palantir. How is that enabling companies to actually get the RO AI that we've long talked about?
Well, I think it enables you to actually walk many miles in your customer's shoes. Instead of having some sort of abstract notion of how will this be valuable, you're actually solving backwards from here's the specific human, here's the work. How do I build this Iron Man suit around this person? And what am I learning as a consequence of doing that? What sort of harnesses are we going to need? How do we add more value? What is missing from here? To the point of the antidote to the managerial revolution, some of the most compelling AI application developers that I'm seeing are actually in the military. These are green suiters, uniformed service members without formal computer science degrees. Yeah. And what you're seeing is, in general, AI is empowering the vocational worker, empowering the person with specific knowledge as opposed to just general skills. And I was, as someone who's worked with the military for 20 years, I was asking myself the question, like, where do these people come from? And I came to the obvious conclusion, like, they've always been here. But 10 years ago, what would they have done? Make a PowerPoint slide, try to convince someone else in some program office somewhere their idea was any good? No, they're too smart for that. They know that they would have kind of just been shut down. Instead, they go off in a corner for a week, they build it themselves, and now you're arguing about an empirical reality. So it's very exciting to see the kind of best ideas from the frontline people have an opportunity to really succeed and transform these businesses.
Shom, I appreciate that point. As you know, Alex Karp and I have done battle over the PowerPoint presentation in the past, and he's made his views on that very known. What I think would be very useful in this moment in time is to explain how either specifically the work that Palantir is doing or just industry in general and how it's changing the battlefield. There is a war in Iran, and there was reporting about the planning of that and the America's ability to move quickly. And while we've not yet had a chance to discuss it over the last 6 months, you yourself have an attachment to the US military that's relatively new. Just reflect on that, please.
Yeah, I think obviously current operations aren't going, but I think people will reflect back and say this is the first large-scale combat operation that was really driven, enhanced, made substantially more productive with technology, with AI.
Yes.
And the word targeting, I think, to the lay public has some sort of connotation. It sounds like someone's shooting, but it's actually a very bureaucratic, large-scale, doctrinal process. So if you thought about that like any, I have a value chain to manage, I have a production process to manage, I have a targeting process to manage, being able to accelerate that. So if you think about Gulf War Gulf War II, sorry. Gulf War II, we did about 1,000 targets. It was 6 months of planning for roughly 50 to 100 people. And in this conflict, you're looking at that equivalent of work for twice as many targets was done by one person in 2 weeks. So how do we give our service members that Iron Man suit? We're making them 50 times more productive than the adversary.
You say Iron Man suits?
Yeah, a conceptual Iron Man suit, right?
Okay.
Like how do I make them superhuman? And this is a realization of the third offset strategy. The first offset was nuclear weapons. Second offset was precision-guided munitions. We don't want to engage symmetrically with the Soviets. Like every missile they have, we need to have a missile. No, we're going to have more precise missiles. So we'll need less of them as a consequence. Don't forget, in World War II, only 6% of bombs dropped hit their target.
But this is very asymmetric right now. And
that is exactly the point. That is deterrence. So, I just wrote a book that came out, Mobilize. Yes. The whole point of the book is we have been in a frog boil. That really, we have lost deterrence over the last 12 years or so. We had the annexation of Crimea in 14, the militarization of the Spratly Islands in 15, Iran with breakout capability to get the bomb in 17. We've had a pogrom in Israel. We have the Houthis holding trade hostage in the Red Sea. Skirmishes, India, Pakistan. You can look at this and you can say, like, maybe we're going to look back in 10 years and say World War III had already started and we didn't know it. So if we want to prevent that from happening, what do we need to do right now? We need to mobilize. We need to get very serious about the magazine depth we have, our ability to make things, produce things in this country. There's the obvious part of building weapons to deter our adversaries. If you only have 8 days of weapons on hand to fight China, that's not very scary. Yeah. You need 800 days. But I think more profoundly is protecting our supply chains. The Strait of Hormuz is a great example of that.
On that rather profound note, we're going to read the book. Excited for you, and we're excited that we had him on the show. Shyam Sankar, of course, is the CTO of Palantir. We appreciate your time here at the Hill and Valley Forum, and that does it, Ed, for this edition of Bloomberg Tech, a really special one.
Yeah, lots to recap, a very heavy focus on reindustrialization, the role of technology on the battlefield. Recap on the podcast. Bloomberg Crypto starts right now.